you'll listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream? Or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath, turn off the lights, leave the world behind, and get ready to drift between dreams and shadows. I was never supposed to sleep in that room, even as a child. I remember my father's tone when he warned me never the basement bedroom. He never explained why. Just that quiet, serious look in his eyes when I tried to ask, as if naming it would make something real. But time dulls memory, and after he passed, the house became mine. I didn't plan to stay long, just a few weeks, to sort through his things. Still, something pulled me to that forbidden door at the end of the hallway there, one that led to the stairwell. To the room below, it was cleaner than I expected. Dusty, sure, but undisturbed. A single bed in the corner, a small dresser, and an old oil lamp by the nightstand. I told myself it was the quietest place in the house. I told myself the warnings were just an echo of my father's oddities. That first night, I noticed it. A stillness. Even before I fell asleep, something about the room didn't match the rest of the house. It wasn't just quiet, it was dead quiet. No wind outside, no creaking wood, not even the hum of the old refrigerator upstairs. It felt like I had dropped into a world removed from sound. The shadows didn't dance as they should. They just waited. Lying on my side, facing the wall, I felt it. That prickle behind the ears, that itch just beneath the skin. The sense that something was behind me, watching, waiting. I turned slowly. Nothing. Of course. Still, I left the light on. The yellow glow from the oil lamp flickered faintly, just enough to push the edges of the dark into the corners of the room. I tried to sleep, convincing myself the silence was peaceful, that the room was just a room. But in the hollow stillness, I remembered my father's voice. Never sleep there, son. Not unless you want it to find you. What was it? I drifted into sleep, eventually. But it was a shallow, uneasy kind. I woke several times in the night, each time sure I'd heard something. A shift, a click, a sigh. Nothing concrete, just enough to tug at my nerves. Just enough to let unease take root. That night was only the beginning. The second night, I left the oil lamp burning again. I told myself it was just for comfort, not out of fear, but deep down, I knew better. The air felt heavier, denser, like the room had sunk a few inches deeper into the earth overnight, as if the very walls were leaning in, inch by inch, wanting to listen to my breath. I laid on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. At first, I thought it was the flicker of the lamp playing tricks, but the shadows, they weren't behaving. In the upper corners of the room, where the light didn't quite reach, I noticed something strange. The shadows were pulsing, breathing, almost. Slow, rhythmic movements, as if the darkness had a heartbeat of its own. I sat up quickly. The movement made the room feel even smaller. I walked to the corner, half expecting to find some mundane explanation, a leak in the wall, a flickering bulb, anything. But there was no source. Only shadow. Still and silent as a cave's mouth. That was when I noticed the chair. It was just a plain wooden chair beside the dresser. One I hadn't remembered from the night before. Had it always been there? I couldn't be sure. I stared at it for a long time. Something about it seemed off. It wasn't the shape or the design, but its position, slightly angled, as if someone had just stood up from it. I turned it toward the wall and muttered a nervous laugh. "Don't be ridiculous." Then I went back to bed, but the sound started again, a faint scraping, like wood dragging lightly across the floor. I bolted upright. The chair had moved, just a few inches, now facing the bed again. My chest tightened, breath caught somewhere between confusion and terror. I stared at it, unmoving. My thoughts tried to force logic onto the scene. Maybe I hadn't turned it at all. Maybe the floor was uneven. Maybe the vibrations from my steps had shifted it. Maybe I walked over and this time moved it into the hallway, closed the door, but I couldn't unsee the way it had turned, deliberately, slowly, like something had wanted to watch. I laid back down, my heart still pounding. Sleep was a struggle, punctuated by jarring moments where I thought I heard footsteps. Upstairs, slow, heavy, deliberate. I held my breath, listening, but they never came closer. Eventually, exhaustion won. But when I opened my eyes, hours later, the sun barely rising, I noticed the door had cracked open, just a sliver, and inside, the room exactly where it had been before, sat the chair, facing the bed. Waiting. I didn't move for a long time. I just watched it, as if it would flinch if I blinked, and I realized something horrible. The room didn't want me to sleep. It wanted me to notice. The third night was the worst. Not because something happened not in the traditional sense, but because of what I heard. Or what I think I heard. It started around 2:13 a.m. I remember because I looked at the small travel clock I kept on the nightstand. I'd stopped using my phone in the room. Something about the glow of the screen felt intrusive, as if the light might provoke whatever was there. I relied on analog comfort. But that night, even comfort was fragile. At first it was barely audible, a faint hum, distant and unformed, as though someone were humming just behind the walls. Not a tune, not a voice, just a vibration, low, persistent, unsettling. I sat up, my ears straining. The sound wasn't coming from the vent, nor from outside. It was beneath everything, like a whisper carried through bone. I stood up and placed my hand on the wall. It felt warm, warmer than the rest of the room. Then the humming shifted. It turned into words. Not clear, not understandable, but it had cadence, like someone speaking in reverse. The hair on my arms lifted. I leaned in closer to the wall, and then, directly behind the plaster, I heard it. "He's listening now." The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. It was hushed, dry like rust, scraping against metal, and more than that, it wasn't through the wall. It was inside it. I staggered back. My mouth went dry as my brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was the plumbing. Maybe an old radio somewhere had turned on, echoing through the house. I turned on the oil lamp and paced in a tight circle. Then came the laugh, short, childlike, soft. It didn't belong in that room. It didn't belong anywhere. I turned to the corner, where the shadows had pulsed before. Nothing. Then the dresser, the closet, still nothing. But when I opened the drawer of the nightstand, just for the sake of doing something, I found something I had never put there. A small, yellowed scrap of paper. Folded neatly, it read, "It waits until you hear it. Then it knows your shape." I dropped the paper and backed away like it had bitten me. My hands were shaking. All at once, the noises stopped, as if someone had flicked off a switch. The silence returned thick, predatory, expectant. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the corner with my knees drawn up, facing the center of the room with the lamp flickering beside me. And just before dawn, I heard it again. A single sound, the same voice, closer this time, breathing into my ear, as if it were right beside my face. "Now, I know where you are." The air turned cold. The shadows grew still. And for the first time, I knew this wasn't in my head. It was intelligent, and it had heard me back. By the fourth night, I no longer tried to pretend it was imagination. Something was in the room. I had no proof, nothing to show, nothing caught on tape, but I didn't need evidence. I could feel it, and the human mind knows when it's being watched. It didn't come during the day. I tested it. I spent hours in the basement room with the door wide open and sunlight streaming through the high, narrow window. Nothing happened. No sound, no shadow, not even a shift in the air. But once the sun set and I was alone, the change was immediate but exact, like a breath held just out of reach. I began documenting everything in a journal. Times, sounds, placements of objects. But that night, I didn't need the journal. Something changed. At 3:07 a.m., I awoke to a chill. Not a gust, not a breeze, but the kind of cold that sinks into the skin from the inside. My breath clouded in, the air, and then I realized I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. At least, that's what I told myself at first. My body refused to respond. My eyes were wide open, my limbs stiff and useless. Only my breath moved short, ragged, visible in the faint light of the lamp. And in the silence, something began to stir. From the far corner of the room, the air shimmered, like heat waves off pavement, but inverted, darker, a subtle warping of space. And slowly, deliberately, items on my dresser began to move. A comb slid an inch forward. Then the small clock turned ever so slightly, and then the lamp dimmed. Not flickered, dimmed, like a hand was covering it, without touching. The shimmer moved toward me, crawling through the room like a ripple of ink through water. And though I saw no face, no form, I knew it was watching, studying, testing. It circled the bed once. My eyes tracked the warping in the air fluid, nearly invisible. Then, with a slow and haunting grace, it moved to the wall, near the door. That's when I saw it. Not a shape, not a shadow, a handprint, pressed into the plaster from the inside. 5 elongated fingers, stretched too far to be human, as if someone had leaned forward, bracing themselves within the wall itself. Then another, and another, all facing inward, all pressed out, like something was pacing just beyond the surface of this world. Suddenly, I could move again. I sat up so fast I nearly screamed. The air returned to normal. The shimmer vanished, but the wall was different now. The handprints were still, their faint impressions, like heat spots, slowly fading into the plaster. I ran my hands over them, and for a brief moment, they felt warmer than the rest of the wall. I left the room and didn't return until morning. But as I stood upstairs with my coffee hours later, watching the sunlight crawl across the floor, a chilling thought echoed through my mind. Just because it has no face, doesn't mean it doesn't see you. And now, it had Dot. It knew me, and it wasn't finished. The fifth night was unlike the others. There were no sounds, no movement, no cold sweeps of unnatural air. But something far worse happened. It started leaving messages. It began with dust, not in the way you'd expect, but in perfect, deliberate patterns. On the dresser, along the windowsill, even the floorboards. Thin lines etched through the layer of dust, like writing done by an invisible fingertip. The first message was a single word: stay. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't written it, and the symmetry of the letters, it was too neat, too intentional, to be random. And the fact that it was written in dust chilled me. Dust collects slowly, subtly. That meant it had been watching long before I'd ever noticed. I wiped it away. Later that evening, I noticed more. On the mirror in the hallway, he warned you. There were no fingerprints, No smudges. The letters had simply appeared, scrawled, in a faint gray film across the glass. I remembered my father again, the warnings, the fear in his eyes, and the fact that this message was written outside the basement door. It was no longer confined to the room. By midnight, I had barricaded the door with furniture, a bookshelf, a chair, even a rolled rug. I told myself it was precaution, but deep down, I knew it was futile. At 2:19 a.m., the hallway lights went out. Just blinked into nothing. I sat on the upstairs floor with a flashlight, my ears sharp, my mind unraveling, and then faintly, from behind the barricaded door, I heard tapping rhythmic, 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 2 more, pause, .1.3, 2, 1. A countdown. I held my breath. The light from my flashlight flickered, as if reacting to something unseen. Then, a whisper slithering from beneath the door. He saw it. He ran. You stayed. I dropped the flashlight. The sound stopped immediately. The hallway remained dark, but I didn't dare move. Not until dawn. When morning finally arrived, I opened the door to the basement. Everything was where it had been. The chair, the lamp, the bed. Nothing disturbed, except one new addition, on the wall written again, in dust, in the same elongated strokes. You are where it wants you. I shut the door quietly, slowly. It was clear now. The messages weren't warnings anymore. They were part of a process, a ritual, a pattern. My presence had reawakened. It wasn't tormenting me for amusement. It was preparing me. By the 6th night, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a haunting. It was a claiming. I no longer questioned if I should leave. I tried. Twice. Packed a bag, grabbed my keys, opened the front door and found myself standing in the basement. Not metaphorically, literally. One moment, I was at the door to the outside world. The next, I was at the foot of the basement stairs. The bag was still in my hand. My keys too. Only, the clock on the wall showed 30 minutes had passed. I don't remember walking. I don't remember moving. And worst of all, I didn't remember deciding to stop. That's when I understood the rules had changed. The house itself was no longer operating under the same logic. Something had taken hold of reality, bent it, pulled me inward, and it wasn't finished yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the basement bed with a notebook and a single candle, writing down every detail, trying to document what could be my last coherent night. But I wasn't alone. The air in the room had taken on a different weight, heavier, thicker. The silence wasn't silence anymore, it was listening. Then, faintly, I heard it dot from behind the wall, like a breath passed through ancient stone. Do you see the seams yet? The voice was neither male nor female, not loud nor soft. It was precise, like the tick of a clock buried in a coffin. It wasn't asking. It was challenging. I stood, faced the wall, and for the first time, I saw them seemed faint, nearly invisible lines, running vertically along the plaster, like something had stitched reality together with trembling hands. I reached out, touched one. The wall gave beneath my fingers, not like wood or stone, but like flesh. Cold, shivering flesh. I stumbled back, then the candle blew out. Darkness fell instantly. But it wasn't just the absence of light, it was presence. In that moment, I wasn't alone. Not in a metaphorical sense. Not a feeling, a fact. Something was in the room with me, behind me, and I could feel it drawing closer, measuring me. Not with malice, but with intent. I turned, slowly, and saw nothing but my shadow. My own shadow was standing on the opposite side of the room, not cast by any light, not mimicking my movement, just watching me, as if the boundary between me and it had thinned. And then, I heard my father's voice. You stayed too long. Now it wears your shape. I screamed, not from fear but from the overwhelming, unbearable realization. I was no longer the only version of me in the room, and the other one didn't blink. There are moments in life when reality fractures not all at once, but in hairline cracks. And by the seventh night, those fractures had turned into shattered edges around me. I couldn't tell what was mine anymore. My thoughts echoed back in voices that weren't quite my own. Reflections held onto my stare just a second too long. Even the pages of my journal had begun to change ink, bleeding into words I had not written. I tried to test myself. Simple things. I would hum a melody and record it. Later, I'd play it back, and the melody would be wrong deeper, slower, with something like a whisper threaded between the notes. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing myself. That night, I didn't try to sleep. Sleep was a door, and I was no longer sure which side I'd wake up on. Instead, I sat at the edge of the bed, facing the corner of the room where the shimmer had once pulsed, and slowly, something began to emerge. Not visibly, not with eyes or form, but a presence, a pressure. The floorboards creaked under no weight. The lamp flickered despite no draft, and I heard a sound not with my ears, but with my teeth, my bones. A low vibration, like something speaking directly into the architecture of my body. We meet where thought ends. That's what it said. I don't know how, but I know it was true. The seams in the wall were no longer hidden. They pulsed, no softly, like veins, and the handprints were back, countless now, crawling up the walls, the ceiling, like fingerprints left behind by a thing trying to get out, or worse, one trying to get in. Then, the chair moved. It hadn't moved since the early nights, but this time, it didn't drag slowly. It didn't shift in inches. It slammed into the center of the room, deliberate, forceful, like an invitation. I didn't want to sit, but I knew I had to. There was no retreat left. The house no longer obeyed time. Outside didn't exist. Upstairs was unreachable. There was only this room. I sat and the shadows closed in, gently like a curtain lowering, at the end of a play, in front of me, across the dim light. I saw it again. Me, but not quite. It stood just beyond the flickering oil lamp, its form twitching slightly with the rhythm of the flame. It had my shape, my posture, but the movements were wrong, too fluid, too patient, and its eyes were mine. But with no recognition, we stared at each other, and then it tilted its head and whispered my father's voice. You gave it a place. That's all it needed. The candle died. Darkness fell completely, but I could still see it, not with eyes, with understanding. I passed the point of no return. The demon hadn't haunted the room. The room was the demon, and now it had what it wanted. A shape, a voice, a host. They say fear fades with time, that the mind heals, forgets, rationalizes, but not this kind of fear. Not the kind that stays with you, not the kind that learns. Your voice, that wears your skin. It's been days, weeks, maybe. Time doesn't move here like it should. I no longer sleep in the basement. I no longer sleep anywhere. I wander the house like a ghost, still tied to the living, drifting between rooms, hoping for sunlight that never comes. The windows show day, but the light never enters. Sometimes I hear footsteps behind me. Sometimes I hear my own voice whisper things I never thought. Sometimes I answer without realizing I've spoken. The mirror no longer shows me. Not entirely. The reflection tries, but there's always a delay. A twitch of the eye after I've turned. A smile that lingers too long, and worst of all, it blinks when I don't. I'm not alone in this body anymore. The chair is always in the center of the room now. No matter where I move it, no matter how many doors I lock, or rooms I board shut, it's there, waiting. And last night, it spoke again. Not in my mind, not in the walls, but through me. I woke up standing in the basement, my mouth dry, my fingers raw from scratching something into the wall. I didn't remember doing it, but I knew what it said before I turned around. You can rest now, keep watch. I don't know who I wrote it for, or if it was even me who did it. I sit quietly now, still, listening, because the moment I let my thoughts wander, it speaks, sometimes softly, like a lullaby, sometimes urgently, like a command, but always in my father's voice. And every time I close my eyes, I see his face hollow pale, watching from the chair, mouth open in a scream that makes no sound, because he never left either. He simply gave in first, and now, I understand why he warned me, because the sleep demon doesn't come for you in a nightmare. It waits until you're awake. Until your guard is down, until your thoughts become shared property, and once it finds your voice, your face, you don't get to leave. It does. Could you sleep after hearing this? What do you think really happened? Was it the room, or something older, wearing it like a shell? Let me know in the comments. And if you dare, stay with me for another tale. The night isn't over yet.